5, 4, 3, 2, 1. I remembered the verse from the Hindu scriptures, the Bhagavad Gita. Vishnu, he is trying to persuade the prince that he should do his duty, and to impress him, he assumes his many-armed form and says, "Now I am become death, the destroyer of worlds." I suppose we all thought that.
Robert Oppenheimer, one of the fathers of the atomic bomb, spoke these words after witnessing the explosion of the first nuclear test in the New Mexico desert in 1945. The phrase quoted by Oppenheimer is a verse from the Bhagavad Gita, a sacred text of the ancient Indian tradition. This quote by Oppenheimer was not an end in itself, but was a clear indication of how the Vedic texts had had a huge influence on him, on his very important studies. In reality, Oppenheimer was not the only prestigious scientist to recognize that the Vedas possessed a superior knowledge and understanding of the universe. Other great physicists of the 20th century like Niels Bohr, Werner Heisenberg, and Erwin Schrödinger, or scientists of the caliber of Nikola Tesla, found in the Vedic texts concepts that seem to resonate with their scientific discoveries. But how is it possible that scientists with a Western education, engaged in the most scientific and technologically advanced projects of the 20th century, found inspiration and understanding in ancient texts like the Vedas? Anyone who thinks that the references to the Vedic tradition claimed by these great scientists are just an affectation or mere learned quotations is mistaken. These men recognize something much deeper and in some ways mysterious in the books of the Eastern tradition. In fact, within the pages of these ancient texts, there would be concepts useful for understanding the dimension of the entire universe. But how is it possible that such ancient texts, written when mankind still lived in a state we can call primitive, contain scientific knowledge that we are only able to recognize after thousands of years? To understand how all this can be possible, we must abandon all forms of prejudice and try to answer this question. Who were these ancient people endowed with such wisdom? How could they have known about scientific concepts that mankind would only begin to understand and theorize after thousands of years? Well, before we continue on this extraordinary journey and try to answer these fascinating questions, as always, we invite you to subscribe to the channel to support our work and not miss our new videos. The Vedas, which in Sanskrit means knowledge, represent one of the oldest and most sacred collections of texts written by humanity. Composed between 1500 and 500 BC, they form the foundation of Indian religion and philosophy. These texts were transmitted orally for millennia before being written down and include four main collections: the Rig Veda, the Yajur Veda, the Sama Veda, and the Atharva Veda. In addition to hymns and prayers, the Vedas contain profound philosophical, cosmological, and metaphysical teachings and describe a reality made up of different interconnected dimensions that extend beyond simple physical perception. The Vedas propose a complex and layered vision of the universe, where everything is a manifestation of a single fundamental entity called Brahman. But what does all this have to do with the scientific discoveries that, in the 20th century, revolutionized human thought? Why would eminent scientists have found answers to their questions by reading these ancient texts, which, as far as we know, appear to be religious writings that seem to have little to do with science? To truly understand what lies behind these texts, we need to take a step back. For millennia, people have tried to answer the question of what reality is and what it is made of. But before we came to understand that everything we see and touch is made up of atoms and subatomic particles it took millennia. If we look at the past of the Western world, there was an extraordinarily modern idea, the thought that reality was made up of tiny invisible particles called atoms. It has its roots in antiquity and began to take shape with the philosophers of ancient Greece, especially with Leucippus and his disciple Democritus, around the 5th century BC, with the atomic theory. According to this theory, the universe was made up of indivisible and indestructible particles called atoms, which moved through the void and formed all things through their combinations and separations. Democritus, influenced by the ideas of Leucippus, postulated that these atoms were eternal and unchangeable, and that their differences in shape, size, and position were the cause of the diversity of matter in the visible world. The atomic theory was revolutionary for its time because it proposed a mechanistic explanation of nature, in contrast to theories that attributed natural events to the will of the gods or to supernatural forces. But where did the idea of atomism come from? Some scholars hypothesize that the Greeks may have been influenced by Eastern cultures, particularly from India, where similar concepts were already present. In fact, in the Vedic context, there were ideas that described reality as being made up of tiny and indestructible particles, concepts that may have traveled along the trade and cultural routes between the East and the West. We can therefore say that in the Western world, if we exclude the atomist theory, there is no trace until modern times of the idea that reality could be made up of smaller particles. Everything changes with modernity, when science begins to confirm the existence of atoms and to explore their nature. The turning point comes at the beginning of the 20th century with the development of quantum physics, born from the insights of scientists like Max Planck, Albert Einstein, Niels Bohr, and Werner Heisenberg, who introduced concepts that challenge the traditional understanding of reality. As we know, quantum physics is a very complex subject, but to help everyone understand the significance of these extraordinary discoveries, we will address the issue in the simplest way possible. One of the fundamental principles of quantum physics is wave-particle duality, which states that subatomic particles, such as electrons and photons, can behave both as particles and as waves depending on how they are observed. So let's imagine that subatomic particles are like a tennis ball. The ball always behaves the same way. If you throw it, it moves in a straight line and you can see exactly where it is at any moment. But in the world of very, very small particles like electrons, which are part of atoms, things are very different. In quantum physics, we discover that these particles can behave in two different ways, just like a ball that can turn into a water wave. Sometimes they behave like a solid ball, and other times they behave like the waves we see when a stone is thrown into a pond. And the surprising thing is that the way they behave depends on how we observe them. If we look at them one way, they appear as particles. Viewed differently, they look like waves. But perhaps the most surprising aspect of quantum physics is quantum entanglement, a phenomenon in which two particles become so deeply interconnected that the state of one instantly influences the state of the other, regardless of the distance between them. This phenomenon is shocking because it seems to violate the principle that nothing in our universe can travel faster than light. While information seems to transfer between entangled particles instantaneously, surpassing the limits imposed by Einstein's relativity. But how is it possible that what we can simply call information can travel through the universe instantaneously? If we take the implications of entanglement seriously, we can arrive at a profound concept. Reality is all interconnected. This means that, at a fundamental level, the universe might not be made up of separate and independent entities, but of a single interdependent fabric, where every part is connected with all the others, in ways that escape our ordinary understanding of time and space. The universe is therefore not a collection of separate objects that interact randomly, but rather a unified system in which each part influences the others, regardless of distance. The separation we perceive between objects, people, and events might be just an illusion. In reality, we might be part of a single network of interconnections that extends to everything that exists. This concept of interconnection resonates deeply with the ideas present and described in the Vedas. In the Vedic texts, in fact, the concept of Brahman represents the ultimate and indivisible reality that pervades the entire universe. According to this view, separation is only an appearance, and everything that exists is part of a single fabric of reality, an ultimate, indivisible, and all-pervading reality, similar to the modern idea of a unified field or an underlying energy that connects everything in the universe. The idea that reality is interconnected at a deep level and that the separation between objects and individuals is actually an illusion is a central concept in the Vedas and finds a surprising echo in quantum entanglement. But these are not the only analogies between what we find written in the Vedic texts and quantum physics. The Vedas, for example, attach great importance to consciousness as the foundation of reality. To explain it simply, in quantum physics, the role of the observer is very special and a bit different from what we are used to thinking in everyday life. Let's imagine that in the world of very small particles like electrons, things are not always clear and defined until they are observed. Before a particle is observed, it can actually be in multiple states at the same time. For example, an electron can be in multiple positions at the same time as if it were spread out in different places. This concept is called superposition. But as soon as the particle is observed or measured, it chooses only one state among all the possible ones. This is known as the collapse of the wave function. In other words, the act of observing the particle is what forces it to take on a definite position or a specific state. This leads to a very interesting idea. Without an observer, reality at the quantum level remains in an undefined state, as if it were suspended between different possibilities. It is only thanks to observation that reality solidifies into one of the many possible options. So in quantum physics, the observer and consciousness are not just mere spectators. They play an active role in determining how reality manifests itself at the microscopic level, an idea that sounds surprisingly similar to the Vedic view. At this point, an inevitable question arises. What are the Vedas? Are they just a lucky intuition of an ancient and primitive people? Or are they proof of highly advanced knowledge? Clearly, some claim that all this is just a coincidence, a lucky intuition developed by an ancient people. But we, like many others, are convinced that all this cannot simply be the result of chance, but rather that it is the result of something more mysterious, with its origins in an era that has only seemingly been forgotten.
Quantum physics has revealed that the world is not a collection of independent physical objects, but rather a set of interconnected probability waves, which in the Vedic texts are well represented by the concept of Brahman, the fundamental unity underlying everything.
At this point, it is necessary to answer the first question we asked at the beginning of the video. Who created the Vedas? The connection between the Vedas and modern scientific discoveries raises fascinating questions about the nature of reality and the potential of ancient knowledge that may have deeper roots than previously imagined. To better understand this connection, it is necessary to explore the hypothesis that the Vedas may have more ancient and surprising origins, connected to the enigmatic Indus Valley civilization. Until the beginning of the 20th century, however, this extraordinary and ancient culture was almost completely unknown, until the remains of the city of Harappa and Mohenjo-daro were rediscovered. The latter is considered the main urban center of the Indus Valley and one of the most impressive cultural centers of antiquity. But what do we know about this very ancient civilization? The Indus Valley civilization, which flourished between about 2500 and 1900 BC, was one of the first large-scale urban societies of the ancient world, comparable to those of Mesopotamia and ancient Egypt. The cities like Harappa and Mohenjo-daro were surprisingly well organized, with regular streets, drainage systems, and large public buildings. Some elements seem to connect this ancient civilization to the Vedas. For example, both in the Indus Valley civilization and in the Vedas, we find evidence of a highly developed fertility cult. In the Indus cities, numerous seals have been found depicting female figures with pronounced forms associated with the mother goddess and fertility. In the Vedas, the goddess Aditi, associated with creation and fertility, plays a central role. Both in the iconography of the Indus Valley and in the Vedic texts, we also find symbols that refer to a cosmic vision of the universe. For example, the symbol of the swastika, present in both cultures, is often interpreted as a representation of cosmic movement. There are therefore various clues that lead us to think that the Vedic civilization emerged from the ruins of the Indus Valley civilization, absorbing its traditions, beliefs, and religious practices. However, many aspects of the Indus Valley civilization still remain shrouded in mystery. In fact, the writing of the ancient inhabitants has not yet been deciphered, and the reason for their sudden decline remains enigmatic. The city of Mohenjo-daro appears to have been abandoned suddenly, as shown by the skeletons found during the excavations, which indicate a sudden and mysterious death. There are many theories about what might have happened, and we discussed them in a previous video. So, to avoid repeating ourselves, if you want to learn more about the history of this fascinating city, we invite you to watch the dedicated video available on the channel and linked in the description. So to sum up, we can say that the Vedic tradition might have an older origin, connected to the mysterious Indus civilization. If this answers the first question, the next question is undoubtedly, who were these mysterious people? The official history, as we said, dates everything to a later period. But if we consider the hypothesis that the Vedas may derive from the mysterious Indus Valley civilization, then we might be facing one of the most fascinating connections between history and mythology ever imagined. The Indian mythological narrative, rich in tales of epic wars and cosmic battles, could in fact hide ancestral memories of historical events experienced by this ancient people. The Indus Valley civilization, which flourished between 2600 and 1990 BC, represents one of the greatest urban civilizations of the ancient world, on par with those of Mesopotamia and Egypt. The cities of Harappa and Mohenjo-daro, with their advanced urban planning and sophisticated drainage systems, bear witness to the high level of development achieved by this society. But there's more. If we consider the Vedas as a possible legacy of this ancient civilization, we could interpret the great wars and divine weapons not only as spiritual metaphors, but as mythological transfigurations of real conflicts. The Indian epic poems such as the Mahabharata and the Ramayana describe battles between supernatural forces that carry an almost modern force. The divine weapons, such as the Brahmastra, which in the Vedic text is capable of large-scale destruction, could be interpreted as mythologized memories of lost technologies or natural disasters that occurred during the decline of the Indus Valley civilization. And if these tragedies were so shocking as to leave an indelible mark on the collective memory, is it possible that they found their expression in the Vedic mythological tales, passed down from generation to generation, eventually becoming part of the Indian spiritual tradition? Therefore, there is the possibility that the Vedic tradition, so rich in spiritual and cosmological teachings, is actually the result of a cultural continuity with the Indus Valley civilization. A civilization that, although forgotten for centuries, may have left a deeper and more lasting legacy than one could have imagined. If we accept this connection, an inevitable question arises. Who were the people of the Indus Valley? Where did this civilization come from, capable of building such advanced cities and developing such a refined culture? And how can we connect all this to Indian mythology, which speaks of cosmic wars and destructive weapons? The answer might lie precisely in the Vedas, which could be not only a treasure of spiritual knowledge, but also a key to unveiling the secrets of a distant past, where history and myth intertwine in a single fascinating narrative. While official history places the Vedas in a period after the decline of the Indus Valley, this hypothesis urges us to reconsider the origin of these ancient texts. If the Vedas were truly the direct descendants of that civilization, we could discover much more about a people who, though shrouded in mystery, may have laid the foundations for one of the world's greatest spiritual traditions. And so, as we delve into the depths of Indian mythology, we may find ourselves facing a forgotten chapter of human history, where historical events have become legend, and ancient battles have turned into symbols of universal spiritual truths. In this context, the Vedas are not just a collection of sacred hymns, but a testament to ancient wisdom, perhaps born long before we ever dared to imagine. If we accept all this, it consequently becomes easier to understand the connection we find between what is written in the Vedas and quantum physics. All this would not be the result of a chance insight by an ancient people, but would represent the testimony of an ancient wisdom handed down to us through very ancient texts passed on over millennia. Clearly, this is a fascinating hypothesis that would further lead us to wonder who these ancient people were, who these gods of mythology were, and what role they played in the history and development of civilizations on our planet.
I go to Indian temples to see how an advanced theory of modern physics had already been written in the ancient texts of India.
At this point, all that's left is to turn to you and ask for your opinion. Are the Vedas just the result of a chance insight? Or is there an untold story behind them? Let us know in the comments what you think, and if you enjoyed the video and want to support our work, don't forget to subscribe to the channel. See you in the next story.